America is exhausted. The noise of politics grows louder by the day. Headlines scream. Social media erupts. Every story feels like it's competing to be the angriest, the fastest, the most viral. But tonight, for the next 9 minutes, what you're about to see is different. There's no shouting, no manufactured chaos, no viral bait, just a conversation unfolding with deliberate calm, a subtle form of destruction on live television, and the reason it matters isn't immediately obvious. Don't blink. The lesson here goes far beyond the words exchanged. President Trump was on the trail this week speaking about affordability, grocery prices, healthcare premiums, energy costs. At the same time, prominent Democratic figures, including Clay Harris and Secretary Pete Buttigieg, are making moves, shaping potential 2028 campaigns and elevating issues their party wants voters to focus on. One of them, Secretary Buttigieg, joined a live interview recently. By almost any measure, the format was designed for tension. Rapid-fire questions, interruption, confrontation. But what unfolded was not a fight. It was a masterclass in controlled, disciplined communication. When the conversation opened, the interviewer brought up ideological divides within the Democratic Party, pointing to polls suggesting 66% of Democrats hold a favorable view of socialism. The question framed the discussion as one of identity and labels, a setup almost designed to provoke. The secretary's response was calm, structured, and unhurried. Instead of attacking, deflecting, or oversimplifying, he acknowledged the point while shifting focus to what actually matters: policy and lived outcomes. Labels matter less than action, he explained. It's not about what someone is called. It's about what they stand for and how they plan to make life more affordable. This approach might sound obvious, but in the media world, it's extraordinary. For a network known for aggressive pacing, for quick questions and even quicker reactions, holding a calm, deliberate tone under pressure changes the dynamic. It forces the viewer to listen differently. It creates a rare space where ideas, not interruptions, hold sway. The interview shifted. The conversation moved from generalities to concrete policy issues. Buttigieg leaned in. He outlined the failures of past administrations. Every misstep, every delayed action, every promise unfulfilled was laid bare. Healthcare, energy, congressional action, or glaring inaction. He did not flinch. He did not pivot to sound bites. Each point was grounded in reality. Grocery prices were climbing instead of dropping. Energy projects promised and planned remained stalled. Tax cuts flowed disproportionately to the wealthiest, while ordinary Americans felt the pinch in real time. The power of the moment wasn't in anger or outrage. It was in facts. Hard numbers, context, every statement tied directly to the lived experiences of voters, people struggling to pay bills, families watching their energy costs soar, workers wondering why policies designed to help them seemed invisible in practice. There was no spectacle, no applause lines, no viral soundbite designed to shock, just reasoning, calm, deliberate, and yet in its quiet, the clarity struck harder than any shouted slogan. It demanded attention, it demanded comprehension. This wasn't merely about what was being said, it was about how it was said. In an era when political media thrives on escalation, Buttigieg's approach disrupted expectations. The host maintained a rapid pace designed to provoke, to pressure, to unsettle. Each question was a test, an attempt to force the interviewee into defensiveness or oversimplification, but Buttigieg refused. Every provocation was met with steady explanation, not defensiveness, not deflection, just a clear, methodical unpacking of policy, consequences, and solutions. Each answer slowed the narrative down. Each response forced the audience to stop, to think, to absorb. The usual rhythm of political interviews, quick questions, quick zingers, soundbite-ready chaos, failed to take hold. The pace of the questions remained brisk, relentless even. But the answers reshaped the space. They transformed the moment into something rarer than most television interviews, a chance to reason, to understand, to engage. Healthcare policy wasn't an abstract talking point. It became a story about the real costs people face when insurance gaps widen. Energy policy wasn't a headline. It became a chronicle of projects delayed, infrastructure left incomplete, and the rising costs hitting households across the country. Congressional inaction wasn't a political quip. It was measured against real consequences. Families paying more, workers losing opportunity, promises unkept. And in that methodical pacing, there was tension, a quiet tension, the kind that grips an audience not through shouting, but through understanding the stakes. The stakes were clear, they were immediate, and they were unavoidable. By the end, the interview had accomplished something rare. It did not dominate headlines with drama. It did not erupt into viral chaos. But But it achieved something subtler, something harder to replicate. It forced thought, it forced reflection. It reminded viewers that clarity can be more powerful than spectacle. That in the age of noise, quiet reasoning can be revolutionary. No pandering, no performance, just facts, just analysis, just the deliberate, unhurried force of truth. And that slowing is powerful. In modern media, speed often equals influence. Headlines flash, tweets explode, stories cycle in minutes. But clarity, true, deliberate clarity, beats speed every time. In a world saturated with outrage, composure becomes a tool. Viewers, exhausted by endless shouting matches, notice the difference. They don't see someone being cornered. They see someone standing calm, connecting dots, offering perspective. That quiet recognition is subtle, almost invisible, but it draws attention in a way spectacle never can. The secretary moved to another topic dominating headlines: the participation of biological men in women's sports. Even in this hyper-polarized environment, his approach was deliberate, principled. He did not frame the issue as a talking point. He did not launch an attack. Instead, he acknowledged the perspectives that mattered. Parents worried about fairness. Parents worried about inclusion. Athletes at every level, from middle school fields to professional arenas. He emphasized nuance, stressing that solutions must be thoughtful, situational, and never sacrificed to political expediency. I would be surprised if this ranks in the top 10 voter concerns this election, he noted. By framing it this way, he shifted the conversation away from the manufactured wedge issues designed to inflame debate toward the real questions that move people: affordability, security, the daily challenges of life that touch millions. It was a subtle recalibration, not dramatic, not performative, but it carried weight, because in politics, as in life, the loudest voices are rarely the most effective. Composure, reasoning, and measured attention to detail are far more enduring. They force audiences to pause, to think, to consider. They transform a debate from spectacle into substance. And in that transformation lies power: quiet, deliberate, undeniable power. The calmness and consistency of this approach did something remarkable. It exposed a truth that cable news rarely admits: the fragility of the format itself. Questions designed to provoke lost their bite. Rapid-fire framing meant to disorient and dominate simply fell flat. The guest did not need to shout or snap. He did not need to raise his voice or interrupt. Instead, he controlled the pace and the structure with a different kind of power, the power of steadiness. Each point was complete. Every context was provided. Every pivot was acknowledged, not countered impulsively. The interview became less about winning a moment and more about building understanding. The usual rhythm of escalation, the rush, the reaction, the spectacle slowed. And in that slowing, influence grew. Viewers watching could feel it, even if subconsciously. Most political media teaches audiences to react first, think later. It trains the eye, the ear, the emotions to equate volume with authority. But here, authority came from something else entirely: composure. Patience replaced provocation, clarity replaced confusion, sustained focus replaced frantic energy. You didn't have to shout to dominate the conversation. You didn't have to attack to be remembered. And in that realization lies the subtle power of the moment. It's instructive because it forces a reconsideration of how influence works. Cable and digital media thrive on escalation. They reward quickness, outrage, and emotional reaction. But viewers over time grow fatigued. They crave something different. They crave reasoning, context, and steadiness. And when those qualities arrive in a medium designed to punish them, they feel the difference immediately. The interview demonstrated that disruption does not always require chaos. Sometimes disruption is quiet. Sometimes it is patience. Sometimes it is simply refusing to be hurried, refusing to be rattled, refusing to turn every provocation into a fight. That quiet resistance, the deliberate pacing, the careful unpacking of facts undermines the system in ways shouting cannot. Audiences recognize it even when they do not articulate it. They see someone not cornered, not defensive, not performing for applause. They see someone connecting the dots, drawing clear lines, and offering perspective. That recognition, subtle, steady, undeniable, is magnetic. It commands attention in a way spectacle never can. The effect extends beyond the screen. It is a lesson in communication, leadership, and influence. Words delivered in haste can inflame. Words delivered with care can transform. The quiet approach does not just survive the noise, it reshapes it. And so the interview leaves an impression that lingers, not because it shouted louder than the rest, but because it slowed down the conversation long enough to make people think, long enough to force viewers to confront ideas rather than react to theatrics, long enough to remind us that influence is not always measured in decibels, it is measured in understanding. In a media landscape addicted to speed, this moment proved that clarity is stronger than velocity, composure is more commanding than outrage, thoughtful pacing is more memorable than spectacle, and sometimes the quietest approach is the most disruptive of all. The discussion then turned to some of the most pressing national concerns of the moment, issues that have captured headlines and ignited intense debate across the country: immigration enforcement, the southern border, local flashpoints like the Minnesota incidents that now reverberate far beyond that state. These topics could have easily been reduced to noise, sensational sound bites, emotional spectacle, or raw outrage. But instead, Buttigieg chose another path. He dissected the facts. Not to diminish the weight of the situation, but to clarify it. Enforcement should be focused on actual criminal behavior, not on law-abiding individuals or families simply living their lives. Target true threats, he said, protect communities, respect rights. That distinction, so rarely made in high-decibel political media, was delivered without theatrics. It was a measured, deliberate unpacking of what goes wrong when intent and implementation diverge. In Minnesota, for example, federal immigration operations have triggered multiple fatal confrontations between agents and residents, leading to lawsuits, protests, and political fallout. The terrain there has become a case study in how enforcement tactics can collide with local norms and constitutional protections, raising uncomfortable questions about authority, restraint, and oversight. Instead of inflaming for effect, Buttigieg contextualized these failures and misapplications of authority. He drew clear lines between policy intent and operational reality, between the idea of law and the lived outcomes of enforcement decisions. The impact of clarity in moments like these is twofold. On one hand, it educates. Viewers learn real-world challenges in law enforcement that too often get lost beneath headlines and hot takes. They begin to understand the tension between federal action and local governance. They see how a policy designed for safety can, if mismanaged, produce chaos instead. Complicated truths emerge where simple slogans collapse. On the other hand, this approach underscores a deeper principle of political communication: explain, don't react. Across every topic in that interview, from grocery bills to immigration law, the exchange adhered to that principle: policy, not personality; evidence, not emotion. This wasn't a tactic crafted for optics. It wasn't performative. It was operational. By structuring responses this way, the guest forced viewers to recalibrate their expectations of political discourse. Loudness no longer equaled authority. Outrage no longer signaled truth. Speed did not determine credibility. Instead, thoughtfulness did. Clarity became the currency of influence. In a media ecosystem that too often rewards conflict, this exchange showed how powerful, calm, careful explanation can be. Viewers instinctively recognize when someone is trying to inform rather than inflame. They feel it when a conversation is anchored in context instead of conflict, and that recognition matters because too much of modern political debate is built on reaction, fast framing, quick cuts, emotional triggers designed to provoke rather than illuminate. But when someone refuses to play that game, when they slow the narrative down and engage each question with deliberation, the entire dynamic changes. Questions lose their provocation. Rapid-fire tactics lose their sting. The conversation is no longer pulled toward chaos. It becomes anchored in substance. That shift is subtle but profound. It forces audiences to think rather than feel, to consider rather than react. And in a political moment defined by polarization, fatigue, and noise, that kind of reasoned engagement doesn't just inform people. It transforms how they interpret every other political conversation they witness. In other words, the quiet power of clarity won the moment, not because it was loud, but because it was true. Even the smallest details of delivery matter. Transitions between topics flowed effortlessly, almost imperceptibly. Nothing felt abrupt, nothing felt disjointed. The conversation moved from healthcare to immigration to economic policy without a hint of strain, each segment building on the last. It was seamless, precise, intentional. Answers remained internally consistent, every point linked to the next. There were no contradictions, no backtracking, no attempts to appease conflicting audiences. Ideas were broken down in ways the audience could understand, but without ever collapsing them into empty slogans or pithy sound bites. Complexity was respected, not abandoned. And when provocation appeared, questions designed to inflame, to force defensive reactions, the response was context, not counterattack. No shouting, no finger pointing. Instead, there was explanation, framing, and clarity. That distinction is subtle but critical. It separates mere performance from genuine persuasion, chaos from comprehension. It is a skill that shapes how information lands, how it is processed, and how it is remembered. For viewers, the effect is cumulative. Each calm, measured response reinforces trust. Every evidence-backed explanation counters the fatigue of endless outrage. Every refusal to escalate challenges the deeply ingrained assumption that political discourse must be loud, reactive, and performative. By the close of the segment, the audience has done more than just listen. They have observed a different standard in action. They have seen discussion operating at a level of thought that rarely exists on television. There is a subtle but profound teaching in that observation. It shows that communication can be a tool, not just a spectacle. That composure can assert power. That clarity can cut through noise more effectively than volume. Each explanation, each careful pivot, each structured argument is an exercise in influence achieved without chaos. The broader implications extend beyond this single interview. In a media environment dominated by spectacle, by rapid-fire framing, and by outrage-driven metrics, calm, deliberate communication becomes a form of soft power. It shapes expectations of both audiences and participants. It educates the public not merely on policy details, but on how to evaluate information critically, how to distinguish substance from spin, method from theatrics. Consistency, preparation, and composure emerge as strategic advantages. They allow a communicator to control pace without force, to assert authority without aggression. They make it possible to persuade by demonstrating understanding, not by overwhelming with rhetoric. They turn the interview from a transactional exchange into a model for engagement, offering a glimpse of what thoughtful discourse can achieve. Ultimately, the power lies not in the loudest voice, the most provocative line, or the flashiest delivery. It lies in the quiet rigor of methodical reasoning, in how each point is grounded in evidence, in how each answer respects the audience's capacity to understand complexity. This is a type of influence rarely seen in modern media, yet its effect is undeniable. The audience has witnessed something unusual, a form of engagement that teaches as much by how it is conducted as by what is said. It demonstrates that persuasion does not require spectacle, that clarity outweighs speed, and that the most subtle elements of communication, timing, consistency, composure, can wield transformative power. In a world accustomed to chaos, that quiet mastery stands out. It commands attention, shapes perception, and leaves a lasting impression precisely because it does not shout. Take healthcare, for example. Instead of a soundbite about premiums rising, the discussion examined why premiums rise, how policy decisions affect costs, and what legislative tools are available to mitigate them. In doing so, it equips viewers with an understanding that extends beyond partisan framing. The same applies to energy policy, economic relief, or education. Nuance matters and clarity empowers. Moreover, the interview models responsible public discourse. When a high-profile figure communicates carefully, acknowledges multiple viewpoints, and anchors arguments in verifiable information, it elevates the audience's expectations. Viewers begin to see that political engagement does not require aggression. Understanding can exist in tension with disagreement. Respect can coexist with critique. By the end of the conversation, one lesson is unmistakable. Power in media is not exclusively tied to volume or drama. It is tied to consistency, clarity, and the ability to sustain composure under pressure. Moments like this challenge conventional wisdom. They remind viewers that influence can be subtle, persuasive, and quiet, and that sometimes those qualities are more effective than spectacle. In closing, consider what this segment achieved beyond policy discussion. It demonstrated that adults can converse about disagreement without collapse. It showed that audiences, exhausted by outrage cycles, are receptive to reasoned explanation. It subtly taught critical thinking, slow down, process context, and question framing. And it reaffirmed a principle increasingly rare in modern media: substance trumps spectacle. America is exhausted, but moments like these offer a brief reprieve, a reminder that political conversation need not be relentless, and that influence does not always roar. Sometimes it whispers, explains, and invites reflection, and in a media landscape where outrage is currency, that kind of quiet power is revolutionary.